Chapter 19, Just Like You. The program makers were extremely clever in creating a show that wasn't just about the military and the physical attributes of soldiers, but also about human psychology. That made it appeal to a far wider audience. It meant that people who didn't have any interest in the military watched it and got caught up in the emotional turmoil of the recruits, and particularly their backstories, some of which were brutal. They could relate to those stories far more than the sight of a man yomping across a hill with a big pack on his back. The recruits' backstories include bereavement, personal illness, bullying, rape, and murder, as well as more universal themes such as failure and redemption. These are stories that resonate with so many viewers. One of the show's appeals is seeing people achieve amazing things despite adversity. That's inspirational to everyone. Humans want to see fellow humans surpass expectations, unless you're one of those bitter, jealous people who feels threatened by other people overcoming obstacles and succeeding in life. It was really important to me that I demonstrated the various stunts rather than gobbing off and asking the recruits to do stuff I can't or simply wouldn't want to do myself. People sometimes say to me, "I see you got the short straw again, having to stand in that icy water or abseil down the cliff face," but that's not the case at all. It's far better to actually demonstrate to people the caliber of soldiers we were and still are. I also just love doing it. It makes me feel alive. Although my enthusiasm did almost kill me during the second series in Ecuador. None of us had done helo drills for years because it's not the sort of thing you do on Civvy Street. Me and another DS on the show, Mark Billy Billingham, were in this Huey helicopter, and I really wanted to beat him down because I was SBS and he was SAS, and that rivalry dies hard. However, the helicopter pilot was quite inexperienced and, a bigger problem, the ropes were wet. So when I dropped out of the helicopter, I might as well not have had a rope. I went screeching downwards from 60 feet up and literally bounced off the floor. The recruits were all watching and saying, "Fuck, how fast was that? Amazing." I injured myself big time. My leg was strapped up and I could hardly walk and was off filming for 3 days. Other times during filming, danger finds us. During Series 4 in Chile, me and the lads were wandering around this reservoir, doing a locations recce, when we heard this big crack. Like a single sniper round. Me and my fellow DS, Ant Middleton, turned around to see this big piece of rock hurtling towards us, spinning so fast it sounded like the whop 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 of a helicopter's rotors. Luckily, it flew straight between us. Had it hit us, it would have taken our heads off. I guess that was some kind of message. You better make the most of life, because just around the corner, there might be a piece of flying rock with your name on it. In Morocco, the recruits were chucked from a helicopter and into some water, and I was assigned to keep an eye on those who weren't strong swimmers. When I popped up, I saw one of the recruits struggling and starting to panic. When I reached him, I shouted at him to relax, and he grabbed hold of me and pulled me under. He was inadvertently drowning me in order to save himself. In the end, I had to punch him in the stomach to make him let go. The safety boat fished this guy out, and when I reached the shore, Foxy was there to meet me. I said to him, "Mate, he almost fucking killed me." And in a quiet voice, so the microphone couldn't pick it up, Foxy said, "Don't worry, dude. That will make for great TV." I later discovered that the recruit had mistaken my "just relax" for "get on my back." When in a state of panic, you'll hear whatever you want if it means you might survive. Dan Cross was another amazing recruit from Series 3. He was away on business when he got a call from his wife, saying there was someone sniffing around the house. The next thing he knew, this guy was in the house and Dan was listening to his wife being stabbed to death while she tried to protect their children. I've been in war zones and lost friends, but that's what I signed up for. People dying is just part and parcel of being a soldier. But Dan's wife and children were entirely innocent. They hadn't signed up for anything. I don't know how Dan found the strength to get through the trauma and not seek revenge. His kids are probably the only reason he's still here. Otherwise, he probably would have taken his own life. You'd expect someone like that to be broken 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But Dan has found a way to get on with his life and is getting remarried, which is just fantastic for him. The story of Mark Pert, who appeared in Series 4, also hit me hard. Just months before we started filming, Mark arrived home to find his wife had taken her own life. Physically, he was the strongest on the course, but it was obvious that Mark still had a lot to deal with mentally. I just felt so much empathy for him. This bloke who had been left to pick up the pieces. Mark was one of only 3 recruits standing at the end, so at least he'd been able to channel all that negative injury into something positive. Efren Brynin was a recruit in Series 2, which took place in the jungle in Ecuador. Efren was well into his 40s, and Anne actually said to him, "You shouldn't be here. You should have your feet up in front of the fire." But during one of our chats, he revealed that he was there because he lost his son in Afghanistan. Efren was suffering a lot, and I felt for him. Appearing on the show was the only way that he felt he could get close to his son, maintain the connection, even though he was dead. That was a significant moment for me, because it made me view things from the outside looking in. When you're in a war zone, you don't think about how it affects people back home. I didn't anyway. I cut myself off because I thought connecting to any emotion at home would soften me and make me question why I was there. A war zone is a harsh environment, and if you don't stay sharp, you're more likely to lose your life. As cruel as it might sound, the last thing you want to be doing is phoning home all the time and discovering that your loved ones are suffering. Or it might be something as innocuous as your son having the flu, the car breaking down, your wife's plans to redecorate the bathroom, or your dog dying. Before you know it, your mind is at home where it shouldn't be. It relates to the idea of peace in war. A soldier will be sitting on the front line with his mates, dealing with sporadic bits of danger, but their loved ones will be listening to stories on the radio and TV about bombs going off here, there, and everywhere. They'll be reading about casualties in the newspaper and seeing pictures of carnage and maimed and dead bodies on the news. And their minds will be in turmoil, thinking about what might have become of their husband, son, father, or brother. Efren made me reflect on my family and what they'd been through, while I was busy not thinking about them. My mum recently reminded me of some letters I sent her while I was serving in Iraq. In one of them, I described watching over one of Saddam Hussein's palaces before telling her we just shot 2 of Saddam's guards. I made it sound so blasé, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. And it must have shocked my mum, especially given I was still so young. In the next sentence, I was asking her to send me some wash and go shampoo, some baby lotion, God knows what I wanted that for, and some chocolates. Those letters summed up my military life. Most of it is very mundane, but suddenly you could be in a gunfight, dicing with death. There was another letter that Mum tells me made her cry. It read, "Mum, do you remember me? I am your son, Matthew. I've written so many letters to you and you haven't replied. I don't know if you realise what it's like out here. Please, please, please write to me." She had been replying, but her letters had been held up in Tunisia. So in the next letter I wrote, "Really sorry. Can you forgive me? What a shit bastard I've been." In the first series of SAS Who Dares Wins, we gave the recruits a choice of phoning home or not. There weren't many people left, and those who remained were physically and mentally exhausted. We advertised the phone call as a reward for all their efforts, but it was another trick. Test of resolve. Anyone with the right amount of focus shouldn't have made that phone call. For some people, hearing the voice of their girlfriend, mum, or daughter was too much to bear. They came out of the room in tears. They were mentally and physically diminished, and their determination was blunted. Suddenly, they were riddled with self-doubt and asking themselves, "Why am I here?" When asked why he declined to make a call, Ryan Roddy replied, "Because I was scared it would cause me to lose focus." That was a good answer. In subsequent series, the recruits had to make a video call. Some came out of the room looking like they'd been hollowed out. Others emerged re-energized, determined to make it to the end for their loved ones. In Series 3, Johnny Davis closed his eyes all the way through his call. As well as being hard as nails, Johnny was very emotionally detached. Much like Ryan, it didn't surprise me that Johnny was one of the last two men standing and to this day is a personal friend and training partner. In Series 4 in Chile, we had to sit and listen to one traumatic story after another. It exhausted me mentally. Every time I walked into that mirror room, I thought, what's it going to be this time? At the same time, the DS reaction to the stories is such an important part of the program because it humanizes the Special Forces. When I was a kid, I thought Special Forces soldiers were superheroes, created on another planet and flown in on a spaceship, or cut from quarries. And people still say to me, you guys are cut from a different cloth. We're not. As I hope the program shows, we're just normal blokes who happen to have done extraordinary things. We have a greater understanding of our own limitations than most people. We understand that boundaries are things we create ourselves, that they're not imposed by some outside force, but we're not these invulnerable alpha males or hard-nosed killers with no feelings. We are aware of our emotions, but we know how to control them and use them to our advantage in conflict. That's not to say we don't struggle with our emotions in everyday life. I've been at the top of my game in the Special Forces to rock bottom in civilian life. I haven't had it any worse than anyone else, but all the same, I've been in some bad places. It's the same with the other lads on the show, Foxy, Ann, and Billy. That makes us relatable, and I hope it inspires people to do things they didn't think they were capable of. Foxy went on national TV to talk about his PTSD, which was a brave and brilliant thing to do. The Special Forces turned their back on Foxy and asked him to leave, instead of offering to help. So him discussing his problems highlighted the lack of emotional support for veterans. Plus, there would have been people sitting at home whose husbands, sons, fathers, or brothers had served in war zones, thinking, oh shit, if this bloke who served in the Special Forces is struggling, then maybe my husband, son, father, brother is feeling the same. Soldiers have been struggling with various forms of trauma since the beginning of time. The guys who fought in the First and Second World Wars suffered terribly after coming home, but their emotions were often locked away. It's bizarre that there were millions of men sitting in living rooms and pubs all over the country, not talking about the awful things they'd experienced. You'd often hear those old soldiers described as quiet men. My grandfather was like that. You didn't hear a lot from him. It was seen as noble and dignified not to talk about their problems. Men had to show a stronger front, pretend they weren't affected by what they'd been through. But I look back now and realise there must have been so much going on inside my grandfather's head. Until recently, soldiers felt embarrassed to share their problems because they thought it was only them who was affected. When you think you're the only one, you become very alienated and insular. You lose your friends because you don't think they'll understand. But one reason that soldiers are opening up now is because people have started to talk about their problems in public. People like Foxy. But there will still be plenty of soldiers out there living with their secret struggles and not coping at all well. Another one of them was my old mate Goldie, a giant of a lad from South Africa, both physically and personality-wise, who was the daddy of 576 Troop during my Marines training. Goldie took his own life in 2017, which hit me hard. Goldie had lost his way and I was trying to find him work, but I had no idea how much he was suffering and I wish I could have done more. During my time in the military and on the circuit, there was nobody to speak to, no outlet for any negative thoughts. Even if there had been anybody to speak to, I don't think I would have taken the opportunity. When my mum came to Australia and I was in a bit of a mess, she could see that I was having problems, but I didn't want to go into them in any kind of detail. Until fairly recently, a common view was that if a soldier was showing signs of mental illness, he was weak. A soldier is a pawn, and a soldier who doesn't put on a brave face and admits to having problems can be swept from the board, just like what happened to Foxy. No one wants to put their hand up and say they're weak, so I was programmed not to admit to anything or even feel the need to. And if anyone else did, I'm sorry to say they had the piss taken out of them and it was turned into a joke. But if you don't share your problems, all those traumatic experiences build up in your brain, and the brain is like a pressure cooker, so that eventually the trauma starts leaking. It makes so much more sense to release that pressure of your own accord. PTSD is not the preserve of the military. Someone can suffer PTSD after being raped, getting knocked over by a car, almost drowning, or 1,000,001 other occurrences. I know that I suffered trauma as a child because I can't really remember much other than the trauma. Not only was I attacked by a chimpanzee, hospitalized with gangrene, run over twice, in trouble with the law, and sent to a remand home, I had a difficult relationship with my father. Taken as individual episodes, they might not sound like much, but individual episodes pile up until they're touching the ceiling and ready to break through. But it's my belief that the term PTSD has become too generalized. Of course, it exists, but it's quite specific. A lot of the suffering that veterans go through is caused by the loss of brotherhood. A soldier suddenly without his mates is like an animal suddenly separated from its pack. You take that camaraderie for granted, which breeds complacency. You no longer have that support network. You're weakened and vulnerable. 1 minute you're a fighting machine and suddenly you're not. And you don't even know why you're getting out of bed in the morning. That's when the problems start. Unless you find a new purpose quickly, you start spiraling downwards. A lot of soldiers think that the grass will be greener on the other side and that they'll be fighting employers off in Civvy Street. But just because you are part of one of the finest fighting forces in the world doesn't mean people in civilian life will realize what you have to offer. Discipline and loyalty are massive assets, but so many companies fail to see it, while the veterans themselves seem to take those qualities for granted and think they're nothing special. To compound the problem, many soldiers lack confidence. They're not used to talking about their abilities because in the military, they're not going to get a reaction. They're too humble for their own good. Some sit back and think, surely someone will recognize what I've got to offer eventually. They wait and wait and wait. Their phone never rings. Lack of confidence and complacency are a destructive marriage. People, including potential employers, don't care that they serve their country. They don't even know where or why our military are serving. And it's very difficult to explain to people who have no basic understanding. That's one of the reasons I didn't want anyone to know I was in the military. I couldn't be doing with the small talk and stupid questions. Other people who do have a basic understanding think you've got a screw loose or wanted to be a soldier. So veterans end up thinking their service was pointless. Before they know it, they start to lose belief, and eventually they feel entirely worthless. That's why a lot of veterans end up on the street. They get depressed and self-medicate by hitting the drink and drugs. It's the transition itself that's traumatic, not necessarily anything you've experienced while serving. Many soldiers return from military life with nothing more than a few dents in their armour. But soon that armour is rusting away and falling to pieces. Chapter 20. Iron Ladies. In 2018, the British government announced that all roles in the military would be open to women, including those in the Special Forces. My immediate thought when I heard this was, if the UK Special Forces are so good at what they do, why would they risk changing that dynamic? The government's decision was obviously based on basic principles of gender equality. Quite rightly, if a woman wants to do a certain job and demonstrates that she has the necessary attributes to do that job, then she should be allowed to do it. But I think the subject of women doing frontline soldiering is thornier than that. Fighting a war isn't really a job. It's a matter of life and death. And a war zone doesn't take societal norms into consideration. If people assume that a mixed male and female special forces team is going to work the same as an all-male team, they're delusional. I don't subscribe to the view that men and women are the same, just as I don't see any problems in men and women being different. When a woman walks into a room full of men, it changes the group dynamic. I'm sure there are people out there who will say, if that's the case, then the men need to modify their behaviour. Well, at least as it stands, people aren't selected for the special forces based on their political correctness and their progressive views on gender equality. They're selected because they're the toughest soldiers in the country. Men behave differently when women are around. Call me old-fashioned, but I'm quite gentlemanly around women. That's what society demanded I should be, or at least used to. I open doors and stand up on trains when a woman gets on and there's no seat. When I was growing up, that was just being respectful, and it's natural for men to be more protective of the opposite sex. That's the result of thousands of years of social programming. I'm not sure that's suddenly going to change if you have women fighting on the front line. And if the changing of that dynamic affects people's ability to operate properly, that might mean people being killed who otherwise wouldn't be. There are a lot of small details that I don't think have been considered. A lot of decompression involves hanging out with the lads in your dorm. Would women have to have separate sleeping quarters with their own toilet facility? Has anyone considered how mixed teams might affect relationships? 1 minute you're off on a 6-month tour with Gary and Trev. The next you're off on a 6-month tour with Cindy and Kate. Military relationships are strained enough without girlfriends and wives worrying if their partners are having an affair with a workmate. And while relationships in the workplace are common nowadays, relationships on the front line would be a different kettle of fish. In Series 4 of SAS Who Dares Wins, we decided to pose the question, do women have the minerals to be considered for Special Forces selection? We had an equal mix of men and women, and I'll happily admit the female recruits surprised me. Some of them were stronger mentally and physically than some of the men. And it was a question a lot of the public clearly wanted to see the answer to, because the ratings went through the roof. I imagine there were a lot of men tuning into it to see the women fall flat on their faces. But I hope there were a lot more men and women tuning in to see them defy expectations. The experiment proved to any boys and men watching at home that there are women out there who are infinitely tougher than them and have what it takes to do a job in the military. That's a positive message. Channel 4 desperately wanted a woman to be victorious, and that's how it turned out, with Lou McCulloch, one of only 3 recruits to make it to the end. But while I now know that there are women out there capable of getting on the start line of Special Forces selection, I still have misgivings concerning the group dynamics. At the end of the series, 2 of the recruits were seeing each other. Imagine that happening for real in a combat zone. You're running into contact, you've got Cindy to your right, Trev to your left, and both go down. If you're in a relationship with Cindy, you're not going to think rationally. You're going to try and save her, regardless of whether that's a correct decision. In war, you shouldn't have to juggle with theoretical questions concerning what is or isn't politically correct. Not when you're dealing with bombs, bullets, and carnage. On SAS Who Dares Wins, we often ask the recruits who the weakest member of the group is. We need to know who's being rejected because we can't see everything. Some people say they can't do it, but they have to. It's about being able to subdue your emotions and not let them get in the way of the facts. Your friend might be a great drinking buddy and buy you nice birthday presents, but they might be shit at their job. So you have to be able to push friendships to the side, because that person you hate might be better for the collective. In a war zone, that person you hate might save your life. If you throw women into the mix in a war zone, there won't just be friendships, there will be romantic relationships. And that's when things might end up skewed. So it's not as easy as saying, yeah, let's just do it. It needs to be well received at the other end. And the reason I don't think it will be universally popular with male soldiers is because while they're trying to integrate women, lives could be at risk. That's not an argument some people want to hear, but I couldn't care less. If equality of opportunity has an adverse effect on quality of outcome, then you have a problem. Any changes that are made to an organization have to improve things. Otherwise, you're just playing politics. The key question is, would the integration of women make the Special Forces a more effective fighting force? To be perfectly honest, I don't think it would. I'm not saying all female teams wouldn't work, but until the day that there are enough women to create all-female teams, I'm not sure it's viable. I think wanting to get one over the men gave the women an extra boost. But I also think the men were spurred on by not wanting to be beaten by a woman. You could see the frustration and annoyance in male recruits' faces when they dropped out while there were women remaining. That goes right back to the playground, when being beaten by a girl at anything physical is considered a joke. As pathetic as it is, that attitude stays with a lot of males into adulthood. But that competition between the sexes also produced negative results. Because the women were desperate to prove the men wrong, and the men were terrified of losing face. People were scared of showing any weakness, and egos were inflated. And as I've already explained, inflated egos are a problem in the Special Forces. There was also the notorious boxing match between a man and a woman, which caused a bit of a stir in the press. When recruit Louise picked fellow recruit Nathaniel out for a fight, Ant told Nathaniel not to hold back, and he didn't, leaving Louise bloodied and bruised. Predictably, some of the tabloids feigned horror, with headlines including, "Female contestant brutally battered by male rival." But you can't have it both ways. You can't be for equality in the military while wanting women to be given special treatment. That will be patronising to women and drive down standards. Ironically, Louise didn't seem to mind at all, while Nathaniel hated the fact he'd beaten her up. But equality of treatment would be thornier in reality. Can you imagine 3 men stripping a woman naked during selection interrogation, as happened to me? Would anyone seriously do that? But that's exactly what they should do, because if a woman got captured behind enemy lines, there is a chance her captors will do more than just strip her. Similarly, everyone carried the same weight, but you can tell yourself you're going to treat them all the same until you're blue in the face. The reality is rather different. For someone like me, who idolizes his mother, it's very difficult to give women a proper bollocking, point out their deficiencies, and call them horrible names. It's just not in my nature. During the series, I was also more inclined to encourage the women. There was a recruit called Nadine, who I stuck with for a day, giving her as much encouragement as possible. I didn't mean to patronize her. That was me simply being nicer to a woman than I would be to a man. People will no doubt say, that's your problem, not theirs. But that's just how a lot of men are wired. And if you translate that into a Special Forces situation, that's not a good dynamic. In a way, the DS on the show are a surrogate enemy, just the same as they are in Special Forces selection. I watch the show back and sometimes think, Jesus, I didn't realise I was that nasty. But the other lads call me Corporal Cuddles because they think I'm too compassionate and quick to praise them, especially Billy, who scares the recruits shitless. I found the chats with women in the mirror room particularly difficult. When Nadine told us she'd been sexually assaulted and had a terrible time with men in general, I didn't know what to do. When a woman starts crying, my natural reaction is to put my arm around them and tell them everything is going to be okay. But I would never do that with a male recruit. Once we got them all together, we could really cut loose. But when it was one-on-one with a woman, I found it very hard to do. Once again, that's problematic, because it's not like we're horrible for no reason. Turning civilians into soldiers takes a series of short, sharp shocks, because it's such a steep learning curve. That's why you have the stereotype of bullying Sergeant Major, constantly shouting at his men. Imagine commanding a non-motivated team in war, conscripts who can't even function on Civvy Street. I can't even comprehend that. It's an almost impossible task. If you hammer them into shape fast, there's an outside chance they'll pick up their game and fight when the bullets start flying. But even if you do, it's far more likely that they'll freeze instead, which must have happened on many occasions. Whether Lou, Milo, or the other winner of Series 4, Mark Pert, have what it takes to do a job in the Special Forces is another matter entirely. Although I'm sometimes asked which squadron the winners are now serving in. I'd like to be able to say that anyone who is still standing at the end of the show has it in them to pass selection. But all I can say with any certainty is that they show the necessary qualities. To pass selection, you must have a military career in the first place. And you can fail selection on so many different things. You might get injured. You might have problems at home. You might even get accused of punching a farmer. The selection process is far more long-winded and complicated than SAS Who Dares Wins. And a lot more can go wrong in 7 months than 8 days. But while I have no doubt that there are women in the UK who are physically and mentally capable of passing selection, I'm not sure there are many women out there thinking, I want a piece of the action in Special Forces. People only think about the glory and glamour and the patriotism. But the reality of Special Forces is hiding in an observation post, watching a target for days on end and shitting in a Ziploc bag in front of your mates. It's travelling to a foreign land, not seeing your friends and family for months on end, and killing strangers. It's seeing your mates get shot and blown up. That's why I'm not a fan of some of the new military adverts, which make life on the front line seem rather cosy. There are people making each other cups of tea, people praying on their mat in the middle of combat. Don't get me wrong, soldiers are nice to each other. But the adverts don't mention that you might see mutilated bodies hanging from trees. It's false advertising, almost tricking people. Next thing you know, they'll bring out an advert that shows soldiers breaking off from a firefight to have a group hug. If only that was the case. But the truth is, war really isn't much to write home about. SAS Who Dares Wins entered more uncharted territory when we invited celebrities to have a taste of Special Forces selection. When we got them off the boat, they still had their hoods on. But even when they took the hoods off, I didn't know who any of them were. That's more a reflection of me than their level of fame, because I don't really watch TV or follow sport. I said to Foxy, who the fuck are these people? Luckily, Foxy does watch a bit of TV and loves his sport, and I had to do plenty of research on them. I thought the celebrity version would be a bit fluffy. I worried about their motivation because they were already famous. And I suspected that as soon as they hit a bit of hardship, they'd chuck in the towel. Obviously, it wasn't difficult to find out about their past online. And there were plenty of tears in the mirror room, and interrogation cracked a few of them. But some of them stuck it out, and I really respected them for that, because they didn't have to. A few celebrities stood out. Camilla Thurlow was famous for her massive social media following and finishing second on Love Island a couple of years ago. In short, she's not the kind of person you'd expect to do well on SAS Who Dares Wins. But she defied expectations. I shouldn't have been that surprised. Camilla is a former humanitarian worker who has actually done a lot of good with her celebrity, including making a documentary highlighting the plight of landmine victims in Cambodia. And a lot of celebrities possess one of the key Special Forces ingredients, resilience. Because you have to be resilient to stay relevant and deal with being in the public eye. When Victoria Pendleton's name came up and I started researching her, I wondered if we were doing the right thing having her on the show. I even received emails telling me to treat her carefully. Victoria had a great career as a track cyclist, winning untold medals, but had spoken openly about her struggles with mental illness, even telling the press that she planned to take her own life after a recent marriage split and a failed attempt to climb Everest. Victoria had a lot to prove, and I was worried that if it went badly for her on the show, it might send her spiraling back into depression. But she did really well, and I hope she got a boost from it, just as I hope everyone who appears on the show does. But the star of the show for me was former Chelsea and England footballer Wayne Bridge. Footballers aren't really known for their toughness, with good reason. You'll see them get a nudge in the back and they'll be rolling about on the floor as if they've been shot. But Wayne was an absolute legend and hard as nails. Because we didn't want to treat the celebrities, although as sports people, Wayne and Victoria aren't strictly celebrities, any different from our normal candidates. We spoke to Wayne in depth about his former girlfriend's alleged affair with ex-Chelsea teammate and England captain John Terry, which opened a few old wounds. But there was more to Wayne's story than that. He's very frustrated because he doesn't know what to do with his life. He had a great football career, won the Premier League, the FA Cup, and played in a World Cup. But he's still only in his 30s. He's got plenty of money, a beautiful wife and kids, but struggling to find a purpose. His situation is not dissimilar to military veterans. Shorn of the buzz and the brotherhood, I really hope that his showing in SAS Who Dares Wins proves to be a defining breakpoint.